You already know that white males are the most violent group of people in the United States. They commit more violent crimes than any other group, and they also commit by far the most heinous crimes. White males are 30% of the population, but account for nearly 3 out of 5 deaths of the elderly. And here's another one to add to that ghastly list. June 23, 2016. Christopher Amos told a small group of kids, a boy and a girl ages 7 and 8 in his Columbus, Ohio neighborhood, that he needed some help finding a toy drone aircraft that he'd claimed to have lost. He lured the 2 children into a nearby alleyway. It was then that the children's grandmother, Candy Arthurs, who had reason to believe Amos was a pedophile, came and confronted him. He then pulled a large knife and stabbed the 45-year-old grandmother in the heart. He then attacked the children, stabbing the 7-year-old boy in the shoulder. Candy Arthurs and the children fled back to their home, where Candy collapsed on her porch. She was rushed to the hospital and underwent a 4-hour surgery. Although she survived the procedure, the damage was already done. After a 6-week struggle to live, Candy Arthurs died on Wednesday, August 3rd. Candy Arthurs was yet another victim of the self-inflicted genocide of white-on-white crime. It won't surprise you to learn that her killer was a white man, the group who enjoys near total immunity from law. Christopher Amos was a sex offender who had already been convicted and sentenced twice, trying to entice children. But he's a white man, so he only served a year in prison after he'd been caught trying to lure children into the shower area of a YMCA. He then did an 18-month bit in 2013 after he'd failed to register as a sex offender. Now, were he anything other than a white man, he'd have been looking at serious time, and they wouldn't have let him get away with it twice, and if he'd been caught having failed to register as a sex offender, he'd be looking at 10 to 20. But he's a white man, so after the charges were reduced to nearly nothing, they gave him a pat on the back and sent him on his way. Amos was arrested at his employer's, and he has been charged with murder and 2 counts of felonious assault. The neighbors in the area were of course angered that this guy was allowed to run around in their neighborhood. How could a pedophile with multiple priors be allowed to live among them where there were tons of children and nobody told them? Amos was a Tier 1 sex offender. And weren't sex offenders required by law to alert the public to their presence? Well, this guy already proved that he considers alerting the public to be optional, but that's only part of the problem. The police told the residents that even though they had failed to safeguard the public, well, the public still could have gone online and looked up whether this guy was a sex offender. Yeah, they could have if they had known to look for him in the first place. Well, I and the media tried to find this guy in the sex offender registry in Ohio, and he's not there. He's only mentioned indirectly in a couple of other obscure databases, so even if the residents of Columbus were inclined to just randomly look for sex offenders based on random people in the area, they still most likely would not have found him. The truth is, if the good white citizens of Columbus want to know why nothing was done to protect them from this animal, it's because he's white, and white males in particular are immune from law. This is the freedom that white people have fought and killed for. No sense in complaining about it now. But as bad as all this has been, there's one other detail that makes this case particularly galling. You'll recall that I mentioned Candy Arthurs was stabbed on June 23rd and that she died on August 3rd, 41 days later. Well, that's the same day the police finally decided to arrest Christopher Amos. You heard me right. The police didn't even bother to arrest Christopher Amos until the day Candy Authors died, over a month after he'd stabbed her and her grandson. But the police claimed that their tardy arrest was just a coincidence, that they had searched tirelessly for the killer of this grandmother of three. Apparently they weren't searching too hard because they refused to ask the public for help tracking down the killer because, as the police put it, they were afraid he might flee. Well, they couldn't have been too afraid. On the night of the stabbing, Amanda Gibson, Candy Arthur's daughter, was shown a police photo lineup, and one of the photos was of Christopher Amos. Amanda picked his photo first, but later wavered on the identification. Candy's grandson, Jeremy, however, picked Christopher Amos out right away, and he didn't waver at all. But for the police, that wasn't conclusive enough. Just because you saw the white man who stabbed you and your grandmother doesn't mean the police have to do anything. Now, if the police refused to act because the witness was too young to be credible, then that begs the question, why did they even bother to ask the child in the first place? The point is the police knew who Candy Arthur's assailant was, but as we've seen countless times before, they refuse to act when the accused is white, and even though he's being charged with murder and 2 counts of assault, there's little doubt the charges will be predictably downgraded, as they always are when a white male is the defendant. After all, the laws weren't written to punish them, they were written to punish you. Before we go getting all vindictive, however, I think this is a good time to inject some good old-fashioned Christian charity. After all, as the white media is always telling black people whenever someone kills your loved one, you need to forgive, forgive, forgive. How can you heal and move on unless you forgive? In fact, you need to do it immediately, right after the white man is accused of having killed your loved one, before the white man goes on trial, so that the public can see that his crime didn't bother you that much. Yes, sir, that's what Amanda Gibson and her kids need to do. They need to forgive Christopher Amos, and do it now, so they can heal, and so his lawyers can lay the groundwork for an acquittal. And this Amos character is an excellent candidate for some Christian charity because he has a tattoo on his hand that references the book of Mark, 11th chapter, 25th verse. And when ye stand praying, forgive, if ye have aught against any white man, that your Father, who is also in heaven, may forgive you your trespasses. But apparently Amanda Gibson doesn't have much of the love of Jesus in her heart, because all she's saying is that she hopes Christopher Amos gets what he deserves. And the media isn't rebuking her at all for her vengeful attitude. Now, what kind of example is she setting for her children, for the public, to see their mother angry and vindictive when she ought to be letting go and letting God? Ah, but when you're white, the usual rules simply don't apply, not to Gibson and certainly not to Christopher Amos. There's no telling if this guy will be convicted again, but the odds are against it. White men are already 50% of the way to an acquittal simply by virtue of the fact that they're white. I mean that literally, by the way, as the FBI crime website points out, whites are 70% of those arrested, but only 35% of the prison population. That type of a rescission rate is completely unheard of for any other demographic. Whites are the most dangerous, most violent group in America, and the ones least likely to be put on trial. Neither the police, nor the media, nor the politicians will tell white people the hard truths about themselves that everybody already knows, but that they are too prideful to hear. They are the most violent group in America and in the world. How many more grandmothers will need to be murdered before white people finally decide to rein themselves in? This is why Candy Arthurs lies dead tonight. Her fellow white citizens have turned her into yet another human sacrifice in the self-inflicted genocide of white-on-white crime.